The key is to pick a strategy more than it does about having exactly the right one, but then having clarity and then structuring roles, processes, and expectations around those.
Hello, and welcome to the Partnerships podcast series by UIIN. In this episode, Balzhan Orazbayeva is joined by Rebecca Robinson, Associate Vice President for Economic Development and Industry Relations at Oregon State University, to take a close look at what it takes to design partnerships that work at scale. Moving beyond one-off collaborations, Rebecca shares how Oregon State has built a more coordinated, sector-based approach to engaging with industry and community partners.
Welcome everyone, I'm Balzhan, and today we're taking you inside Oregon State University's partnership model to explore a very practical question. How do you turn an engagement strategy into partnerships that actually deliver long-term value at scale, and both for industry as well as community, but also university on the other side as well. And I'm joined by amazing Rebecca Robinson, Associate Vice President for Economic Development and Industry Relations at Oregon State University. Welcome, Rebecca. Glad to be reunited with you.
Thank you, Balzhan. Great to be here.
Rebecca works at the intersection of strategy and delivery, helping the university team to build and sustain collaborations with industry, government, and community stakeholders that support research, innovation, and regional impact. And in this conversation today, we're going to unpack how partnership models are defined and activated and what it takes to coordinate internally. So Rebecca, thanks again for joining. Just to kick this off, I'd like to start with exploring what does Oregon State's partnership model look like in practice and what problem was it designed to solve?
Thanks, Balzhan. It's great to be here. As I think about how I would describe Oregon State's partnership model, one, it's important to note that the centralized model at Oregon State was just established a couple of years ago. We have a long history of engaging with the private sector, but really centralizing it is relatively new for us. And so the way I would describe it is that it's built around what I would call a front door plus connective tissue. So it's not a single office trying to do everything, but still functions as a university-wide engagement model in partnership with colleges and divisions to drive more holistic growth. The other thing I would say about it is that we're sector-based. So we're focusing on our most promising economic sectors that are designed, and ultimately it's designed to operate at multiple scales. And then the last thing I would say is that it's focused on trying to make engaging with the institution easier for our partners and easier for us to align internally. So for us, the problem we were trying to solve was over the last several years, as we've seen, at least in the US context, an unprecedented sort of federal opportunity to scale our engagement both with the private sector and our communities to drive economic development. And the scale of those opportunities outgrew the way that we were organized. We had a lot of impact, but we didn't have a system to really address the new kinds of opportunities that existed. And so whether it was national investments like the CHIPS and Science Act or the National Science Foundation TIP Directorate, they just changed the game. And this structure really helped us to be better aligned to convene across a lot of our stakeholders for those kinds of opportunities.
It sounds like a lot has happened over the past 2 years. So I'm wondering now, what really triggered this shift towards a more structured approach towards engagement, especially the way you describe it when you have a centralized unit, but you also have those arms in pretty much all departments. And I also especially appreciated the way you described the sector-based approach as well. So I wonder what triggered that shift, and also why did you decide to go for this particular model to begin with?
As I mentioned, that opportunity landscape shifting. And a big part of that was recognizing that some of these large place-based initiatives require much deeper coordination across, multiple kinds of partners and stakeholders externally than our traditional engagements. And at the same time, our individual partners were asking for broader engagement with the institution and more than just, say, access to a single college or faculty member. And that while some of that was already happening, we had really great internal champions who were stewarding relationships across domains or units, but it was inconsistent and uneven. And internally, our faculty and staff were absorbing a lot of the coordination and translation work that oftentimes could or should be institutional, but they were having to absorb a lot of that work. And so our ad hoc success stopped being enough to actually try and convene some of these larger scale partnerships across both lots of units and domains internally as well as externally. And so just the trust, scale, and speed that was required to do that required this more structured approach to a shift.
I hear there's obviously a lot of complexity that is involved, starting with a wide variety of partners, the number of engagements, number of internal stakeholders involved. So I wonder, how do you decide what to say yes to, who to collaborate with, at what level, how to collaborate with them, specifically who should be involved internally, all those little questions that usually come with coordination of that scale. So do you use any criteria, tier models, or portfolio views?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, that sector-based approach that I mentioned is key here. So for us, having dedicated sector-based leadership helps us define, one, priorities where we can spend more capacity and where we can dig into deeper partnerships. And so, for instance, for us, the first sector that we have started with was the semiconductor sector. As a state, we have a deep concentration of companies in that space, and our university provides a majority of the workforce in that particular sector in the state. And it was focusing in on a sector allowed us to, one, say yes to that, one, deep engagement in that sector, but also provide a different level of at least centralized engagement and support for other sectors. So where we don't have yet capacity across all sectors, we don't have a fully built out sector-based team yet. That's where we're working towards growing into. But for other sectors or other, say, types of relationships within other sectors, we're really focused on building capacity within the institution. So building in those best practices around relationship management or what it means to build a collaboration with companies so that it doesn't require a centralized necessarily approach for every type of relationship. And we're still supporting those relationships, even if it's not the prioritized sector, given capacity constraints.
It probably takes a lot of effort to build those kinds of teams, especially when you put so much thinking behind this sector-based approach that I'm so curious to observe going forward as well. But if we were to talk about the roles that are being involved, so who would need to be involved internally in those teams to make partnerships run smoothly? You already mentioned, relationship management, partnership management. But if you were to describe this role, the roles really, who would be involved?
I think the who's involved really depends on the nature of the partnership and what the partner is interested in. And so different partnerships activate for us different parts of the university. And that could be a relationship manager, whoever's serving in that role is stewarding the relationship. But then they would engage other parts, whether it's the research office, technology transfer, advancement, government relations, communications and marketing, procurement, IT, and of course, all of the colleges and academic units, right? So it really depends on what the nature of what that company is interested in engaging with us. And then it's almost like a toolkit to go across the institution, engage the various parts that make sense to ultimately orchestrate a comprehensive relationship with that partner.
Very interesting. So you did mention the word company. So now I have to think about community as well, because I know it's very important and part of the vision as well. So how would you then structure partnerships when both industry and community stakeholders perhaps are involved? Is there then approach a bit different from how you would work with industry partners versus community partners?
Yes and no. I would say using both a needs-based approach is consistent across different kinds of partners, but those needs might be a little bit different. Their motivations might be different. Their expected outcomes might be different. And so engage with community as well as industry, and sometimes together at the same time. And that, I think, is actually where we do play a really valuable role as a neutral convener and sometimes translator, and ultimately structuring those relationship based on sometimes shared needs. So for instance, if we're working on a large economic development initiative that impacts our community, but industry partners are vital components of that, then we might be helping to translate what does it mean for work to do workforce development or startup support or infrastructure development in the region that impacts both those industry partners and our community partners.
The UIIN Conference 2026, where universities, industry, and innovators meet to shape the future. Join us in Stockholm for 3 days of insight, inspiration, and impact. Hear from global thought leaders, expand your network, and be part of the conversations driving collaboration forward. Secure your place now at uiin.org/conference.
I also see we received an interesting question to keep building on the conversation that we have just now around roles and how the team is functioning. So do you have a structure for the relationship management when someone leaves and then that relationship, whether with industry or with community or with government, set actually with them?
Yeah, I think this is an important question because trust and relationships are the heart of, I think, of managing a relationship, but those are vulnerable if they're a single point of failure at times. And this is where I think it is valuable to have almost like a small team that is supporting an individual relationship. So you may have someone who is kind of the lead and is helping to manage the day-to-day, the expected deliverables, but having whether it's a backup person who is also engaged in that relationship and understands the dynamics of it, has some relationship. That way you're not as susceptible to transitions. The other thing I would say is if transitions are happening or anticipated to happen, I think those handoffs are really important and making sure that there is full integration as that person is transitioning out into those other relationships. That's why things like also record keeping and other types of systems to ensure that there's some sort of institutional knowledge and that it's not necessarily a single that a relationship will come and go as people come and go, but that it actually truly maintains an institutional relationship.
I certainly do agree. I think as much as we always say that individuals are the boundary spanning agents and they drive the collaboration, but in order to be able to keep that collaboration going, it is important to develop some sort of institutional knowledge, as you said. I thought it was nicely put.
And the one thing to point on that too, I think that's important on the company side too. So like as you're thinking about developing a relationship, if you're dependent on a single individual within a company, that's great to have a champion. But if you can have more than one champion or at least more than one contact there, so that if something changes with that particular partner's role, that you aren't susceptible to losing all of the valuable work and time that relationship management or stewardship has been.
Absolutely. And this is where I think the tools come in. And this is where I again look at our chat here, because indeed, as Andrew is suggesting, for example, Salesforce or other CRM tools could be a good support for those kinds of intentions. But I wonder, what is it that you use perhaps? Like what are the systems that you have in place for those kinds of relationship management situations?
We do not have a system right now. We are in the process of having these exact discussions. And I've had a lot of conversations over my career about systems. Systems are one solution here. I think also just internal communication, like having conversations or being in communication with each other is another. The challenging part about systems is that I think relationship managers are probably pretty good at putting information into systems, but expecting everyone across the institution who might engage with the company to input information into a system is really challenging. So it's really hard to have a true snapshot of what the comprehensiveness of a relationship is. Where we have focused is on our most strategic relationships and trying to have at least an understanding of what we're doing across those relationships as a start. And that just means communicating with all the various partners who are engaged in it. We are certainly exploring how do we connect all the various data systems institutionally to capture day-to-day. Sometimes I put information into other systems within our institution to try to capture as much as we can. But I think it's a challenge, I think, in the industry.
Absolutely. Especially, I think this whole conversation around how to capture and what to capture is a challenge on its own. So maybe what we could also perhaps talk about is, because I would be very curious to hear also your opinion or your take, actually, how the university generally goes about it. How do you define long-term value in partnerships? Because that in turn also dictates on how you want to capture that value. And maybe especially you can talk about the strategic partnerships that you just mentioned before.
So long-term value, I think, is defined around mutually beneficial relationships where you're not having a one-sided, whether it's like where we are giving more than we're getting in that relationship. One, I think it's also important to note universities are paid in many different kinds of currencies and many different types of ways through many different types of engagement. And the long-term relationships that have a long-term value are they deepen, adapt, they survive leadership changes, and they value shows up in trust, repeated engagement, and shared investment. So it's really about the ability to have someone who is comfortable enough to come and say, hey, I've got just the project for you without having to go through all of the sort of dance to matchmake first. And ultimately, they come back and know you as a trusted partner and are willing to engage consistently. And I would say our most strategic partners do that, right? One, they have mechanisms in place to engage with us consistently over time, and they do, and there is shared investment on both sides in terms of both the time and resources in that relationship.
And then this is where the dances turns into this beautiful choreography that has been trained before. Nice. If we have so many universities joining us and listening to us and other partners as well. So if someone would like to also improve their partnership model, say in the next 6 months, where should they start? And what would be, for example, 2-3 practical things that they can do, especially given that sometimes when you want to centralize the relationship management or when you want to rethink the approach, it also takes time and energy to get a buy-in from the executive team. So maybe you can share your experiences with us and also as a message to everyone who's listening.
Yeah, I would say the first step is building trust internally if you haven't already. So say you're new to an institution or you're just trying to do something, that trust, the relationships internally are the critical sort of building blocks to ultimately engaging well externally. And so that I also think can be done through convening those other engagement professionals across the institution and recognizing the various roles that everyone plays so that it's not necessarily trying to supersede or take the place of other relationships or structures, but it's a way to better convene and coordinate them. Second, I think those developing intentional communication and trust building structures. So what are the norms? How do we agree to work across, various units? Third, I think is picking a strategy and committing to it. So whether that is we're going to map who we currently partner with and decide how to tier those and prioritize them, agnostic of sector, maybe it's a sector focused, maybe it's a hybrid of those, or maybe it's just focus on building individual institutional capacity rather than centralized relationship management. The key is to pick a strategy more than it does about having exactly the right one, but then having clarity and then structuring roles, processes, and expectations around those.
I really like what you're saying because, for example, with our work at UIN, what we often see is that it's almost like everyone tries to find this silver bullet, whereas it doesn't exist. And it shouldn't as well, because essentially everyone should just work with what actually works for their particular context. That's not to say that it's very easy to do, but I think what you've done is actually finding the approach and perhaps the blueprint that is your own, and therefore it also is working for your institution. Really appreciate you describing your approach in such a detail.
Yeah.
I know we have so many questions. Thank you so much, everyone. So nice to see so much curiosity and also some of the practices that are being shared in the chat. But maybe one last from me, and then we'll see if we have more time. I'm also just curious now that you've been through that process of coordinating this massive effort of creating this new approach. What is something that perhaps you have changed your mind about when it comes to partnerships and engagement? Was there something that you had to unlearn to do?
So as you know, I've been at other institutions, have built this, and then have come to OSU in the last couple of years, and I'm working on building this structure. I think I've changed my mind about relationships living with a single person. Having a clear relationship manager is really helpful and important, but it should not be the only place that knowledge or context lives, I think. And I think relationships are stronger when there's some shared stewardship. It does take great, strong communication internally, but the reality is like trying to have sharp elbows about who owns a relationship I think is sometimes detrimental to our own efforts internally. And actually just having shared trust around how we're stewarding a relationship might actually be most impactful. So having that team-based approach, I think can actually really advance our relationships more than maybe we think they would if we had everything really tightly controlled.
It's so nicely said. I mean, collaboration is a team sport. We always say it doesn't happen in isolation. And I think when it comes to management and governance of it, it's the same logic, really. Like we cannot just focus on the individuals. It is about building this institutional capacity and building the teams out. Maybe one last question actually on that, because you did mention that it's important to build practices to support those champions across decentralized systems. But how would you engage various areas such as marketing, IT, and mentioned a few other departments, but how would you usually go about engaging them in that process?
So for us, we have a core team that meets every week or every other week. Those are mostly the units that are centralized units that support industry, various parts of industry engagement. And we convene them. And so one, that maintains a consistent relationship across those various partners institutionally, but also it allows us to triage, specific challenges or opportunities. And so whether it's, hey, we've got a company who wants to do joint marketing with us, and we would normally need to check with our partners about that, then we would engage with them in that context. But having that consistent communication and relationship is really helpful in managing it. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. That's not the only format that we're working with. As many of you may know, we have a few upcoming forums, but we're also looking forward to seeing many of you in Stockholm for our conference. And this is where I hope we can continue all of those nice exchanges. So thanks so much, everyone, for so proactively contributing to our conversation with Rebecca. And Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time and care, for sharing your approach, and for really describing it in such a detail, because it really shows and tells how much effort went into creating this approach. And we will certainly keep an eye, and we look forward to learning more about how you go forward with that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks, Balzhan. Great to connect.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.